Hey Emma,
Yes, Madeline.
what do you call it when you feel like the AI is being unfair in your favorite real-time strategy game?
I don't know. What do you call it?
Rage of Empires! Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your villager, building a market host, Madeline.
I'm your struggling artist host, Oops.
You can't cut it. You can't cut it.
I was gonna say, I'm your struggling artist host, Emma. Oh wait, that's Madeline. I got ahead of myself a little bit.
I've finally done it. I've taken over.
I was also thinking about how sad that joke was, so you're just on my mind.
Was it better? Here's the alternate joke. What do you call it when you get to a really date-oriented question from your AP World teacher?
I don't know. What do you call it?
Age of Empires.
Yeah, no, that one's pretty bad too.
Do you want Stage of Empires? Page of Empires? Sage of Empires?
I just think that the rhyming of age being the only thing you've got going on is a little weaker than normal. That's all I'm saying.
I thought about doing We Are AOE, but what's that? I don't know. There's no joke there either.
It's area of effect, Malin.
I know. I knew AOE stood for something, but I couldn't. Anyway, listeners, thanks for tuning in. This week, I'm going to be talking to myself about Age of Empires and We Are OFK. And I promise to only spend half of the Age of Empires time talking about Age of Mythology. I promise.
I think that's fine. I felt very stupid. Of course, Age of Mythology is part of Age of Empires. Obviously.
I can't believe you didn't know that.
I didn't think about it, I guess.
I can't believe you weren't totally up to date on real-time strategy series naming conventions when Age of Mythology came out in 2003.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I don't think it's just as a side note, I don't think I've played any other real-time strategy game.
You didn't they don't have the clan. I guess the Yakuza 7 probably doesn't have clan creator, huh?
No. I played the Final Fantasy 12 spin-off on the DS for a very small amount of time, and that's the only other RTS I can remember playing.
Yeah, it's not something that I like. A lot of Age of Mythology.
Yeah.
I can say at various points throughout my youth, but not really too much other than that. I mean, what else would you need?
I don't know.
I did, in researching this, I had a vague memory of us maybe having the DS version of Age of Empires, but I might be confusing it with having the DS version of Civilization.
I don't know.
Me either.
The DS version of Age of Empires is not real-time strategy, though. So.
Oh, well, forget
it's turn-based.
So anyway, Age of Empires, which is the actual game that we will be talking about today, is a historical real-time strategy game originally from Ensemble Studios and published these days, I think, by Xbox Game Studios. Maybe even then. I think then, too. The original came out in 1997. They've released something like 9 total games, although it's hard to count given the many sort of spin-offs. They're which of those count as games and which of them are just expansion packs.
Yeah.
But in Age of Empires, you take control of an empire, although I'm going to talk a little bit later about a lovely think piece about Age of Empires that I read that was none of these things are empires. This isn't what an empire is.
Sure.
But more on that later. You take control.
Age of Civilizations probably would have been a problem.
Yeah, they suggested Age of, what do they call it? Fanatically murderous nation states.
I don't think that's as catchy.
Depends on the audience.
I guess so.
Anyway, the original came out in 1997, and in that original game, you play as well, I think there's a bunch of different civilizations, but you can follow in the campaign the history of the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Babylonians, or the Yamato people in Japan. Plus, the demo had a campaign for the Hittites, where you advance that civilization from the Stone Age through to the Iron Age, and conquer everyone around you, and devastate the local environment by harvesting as many resources as you can, and generally get your real-time strategy on.
Yeah. Yeah, you build, town centers, and you build buildings around it, and you gain resources so that you can make better buildings and technology, but you have to be careful with your resources because they don't replenish in the area. So you have like sort of a finite supply to work with over the course of the game. Yeah, and you have lots of units that either can be like gathering or fighting people or whatever that you sort of command on the fly to do things for you.
And your priests go wololo.
Exactly, yeah.
Which I don't think anyone in Age of Mythology did, so I don't have the attachment to the wololo.
Yeah, I don't think the worshippers, when you're playing the Greeks, you would worship at the temple, but I don't think they made any noise.
Yeah. I don't think the priest units were not like, quite the same in Age of Mythology, because kind of everybody was, direct line to the gods in Age of Mythology.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Age of Empires, it's so hard. When I start saying Age of, I just say Age of Mythology. So Age of Empires, very, very, very popular series, right? It's sold over 25 million copies since that first edition. And yeah, it's like one of these series that is such the hallmark of the old games on the podcast these days, of like, there were a bunch that came out in the late 90s and early aughts, and then it got kind of abandoned for a while because Microsoft was more thinking about Xbox, and now it's finally seeing a resurgence. So the original was actually, like, they set a historical setting, which I thought was interesting, because they wanted to make it more accessible to, like, casual players. Real-time strategy at the time was, like, really dominated by either sci-fi or fantasy games, like you might think of Warcraft. And so they felt that by picking history as opposed to a spaceship, I guess, that was going to be more appealing to more casual players, which seems to have worked. Mm-hmm. Sure sold a lot of games.
Yeah.
But this is also like the peak era of, and we had the expansion pack for Age of Mythology eventually. This is the peak era of expansion packs for games.
Yeah, I was gonna say, even during like that period where they weren't releasing like new games, they were still releasing a lot of expansions for Age of Empires 2 specifically, which was the one that Age of Empires 2 has had the longest life cycle.
Age of Empires 2, while all of the games are at least relatively well reviewed, Age of Empires 2 is really sort of like the classic one.
Yes. On the greatest games of all time list, Madelyn.
You're killing me on this recently.
Did you not look?
I don't know. I didn't. No, I didn't.
Well, both the first and second game are on the greatest list of all time.
Oh, man. It really is. I am Emma. And that's
We've
Madelyn.
Switched.
We've swapped.
You would never know.
We could have swapped from the beginning.
Yeah.
And no one would have ever known.
No one would have ever known.
Anyway, the first one is set like Stone Age to Iron Age. Age of Empires 2, Age of Kings is like the Middle Ages. And then they do it Age of Empires 3. So 2 was 2000, 3, 2005. And 2005's Age of Empires 3 was like the early modern period, like the 1400s to the 1800s or so. And some of the reason that things slowed down on the Age of Empires front for a while there is that Ensemble Studios, Microsoft shut it down in 2008. And so that left, they were still releasing expansion packs, but for about 15, it's not quite 15 years, about 10 years there, this was one of those games that was very much maintained, or game series that was very much maintained by sort of an active, passionate community and the modding community. Some of whom, like, all the studios that make the remakes now are like, they used to be modders and now they make the games, which is kind of neat, I thought.
Yeah, I looked a little bit at Age of Empires Online.
Yeah.
Which was apparently a very predatory online experience. But it was released in 2011 and then shut down. Well, they stopped developing it until in 2013 and then shut it down in like 2014. But in 2017, a group called Project Celeste used the publicly released developer kit for the game to host it on a server emulator. And it has the single player and multiplayer mode with all online features.
Feels like you could not do that with a game anymore.
And they even released the unreleased Roman civilization for play.
That's wild.
They developed it and released it. And are currently developing the Indian civilization, says Wikipedia. So
it's so interesting, the different relationship of certain studios and IPs to these kinds of communities, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, you know, there have been all of these. So Age of Empires just had its 25th anniversary, and they had like a big announcement, like several of the games are coming to Xbox. Age of Mythology is getting its long overdue, like, total remaster kind of situation.
They had previously released like the expanded edition for Steam, I think. But
right. But it's getting the same remaster treatment that I think pretty much all of the Age of Empires games have gotten at this point.
Yeah.
There's also, by the way, so Age of Empires 4 just came out in 2021. I think it's been out for about a year, which is sort of wild that it's like, oh, they have returned to this.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure people didn't like really think was going to happen. But so with the 25th anniversary, there've been like a lot of interviews with like, there was someone with like Phil Spector about it and like the head of the current studio about it. And they're very very appreciative of the fan community in a way that seems at least to be quite genuine, which is interesting and refreshing. And I do feel like is maybe more common in these kind of like strategy games that came out while like modding was still, I don't know. Modding feels less like technical these days to me, even though like I know that's not real. It's just the impression of it now to me is like when I see mods for games, it's like, ha ha ha, it's Shrek. It's Thomas the Tank Engine playing Elden Ring or something like that.
Yeah.
And I know that's like not exactly what modding is, but that's like, I don't know.
I mean, that's part of modding. That's just the model swap is the foundation of the mod community, I think.
Of course.
But there's more than that, of course.
But I feel like there was a different relationship back when someone like you or me maybe could have learned how to mod a game. Now it's like, it's too late. There's no way I could ever learn. I won't say
I don't
that for
think
you.
that's true. I would think it would be easier now, actually.
Okay, fair enough. I just mean, like, I don't know. Like, back before the internet was the internet the way it is now, I feel like those sort of modding communities...
I think those sort of modding communities were better at computers than I'll ever be.
Sorry, that's not what I'm trying to say.
Is what I mean.
I'm not expressing myself very well here. I'm sorry. I just mean, I think that there used to be... Not that there was, like, a combative relationship necessarily with, like, putting Shrek in games sometimes, right? But I think that rather than there necessarily being, like, now it's sort of like, like, benign neglect sometimes, I feel like there used to be a much, at least in some games, a much, like, closer relationship between the developers and the modding community. And that seems to have continued to have borne out over the history of Age of Empires, as opposed to, like, I'm sure no one at FromSoft, like, has talked to anyone who has put Thomas the Tank Engine in their game.
Sure. No, sure, I agree.
It was interesting to me to read about the research, or lack thereof, that went into the historical elements of these games. There was at least one article that I read that was like, they mostly researched from, like, children's books, like children's history books and libraries. It's like, you know, that does track.
I guess that's fair.
I mean, there's a fair bit of stuff that's just like, you know, they want it to be historical, but like they're not that concerned with it being accurate. Which, man, I know that like it's still that way, I think, in Age of Empires 4, although maybe to a slightly lesser extent. But you would not get away with that launching a series now.
Sure. I mean, I think it depends.
Sure.
I think there's, you get a lot of people throwing around like, oh, you can't have women because that's ahistorical, you know?
That's
and that
true.
gets a lot of pushback because it's stupid.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? Well, I saw in one of the interviews regarding what the work they're doing on the Age of Mythology re-release is part of it is they're going back and reevaluating how they're presenting those cultures and mythologies. Yeah. So it does seem like that is something that they are now considering, even in their most ahistorical game.
Yeah.
What do you mean the Greeks didn't have, Cyclopses fighting on their side and
what
Medusa?
No, it's like I even felt like Age of Mythology. I mean, whatever. It's still like disrespectful, I guess. But like Age of Mythology is the one where it's like, oh, like okay, like maybe you can get away with it, right? Like okay, like it's all based on mythology anyway. As long as it's like semi-accurate to some kind of mythological telling, like that's good enough.
Sure. I mean, there's stuff so like the buildings and the clothes and stuff as well, though, that are obviously not mythological.
You're telling me they didn't do extensive research into the little, like, language snippets that the villagers say when you click on them?
I doubt it.
You are here. I remember the feel of them. I can, like, hear the cadence of them more than the actual syllables. That's how burned this game is into my brain.
I see.
It's also interesting, speaking of these communities, now they have, like, in like a similar way, I guess, as like I was reading an article on like the Sims community recently and like how it's the Sims 4 right now, right? It's been the Sims 4 for like 15 years and they continue to release things to it.
Yeah.
What?
I don't know if it's been 15 years, but I'd have to check that.
I think it's not so... I mean, okay, 15 years might be a slight exaggeration, but I don't think it's so far from that. But, like, it was interesting to be like, okay, but, like, there are still, like, active Sims 3 players, and, like, that's a community that still exists.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to read about how now they're like, well, we have Age of Empires 4 that we released last year, and so because of that, people thought that, like, maybe we would stop releasing new content for, like, the Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition. But, like, that's an important player base, and it may even be, like, a greater player base than Age of Empires 4. So it's like they still have a roadmap for that, and for another one of the definitive editions, and they're like supporting these presumably overlapping but not totally overlapping communities simultaneously. It's like, man, that must be tricky to balance.
I mean, I just think about like Final Fantasy 11 still gets updates.
That's wild.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
Yeah, but like cuz like you hear about the other one all the time, but they're still supporting their older game. And it's just you get used to it. You play that, you're in the competitive scene, maybe, although I don't think you see this as much with like fighting games. Like, is there a competitive scene for like Smash Bros. Brawl anymore?
I don't know. I have no idea.
But I mean, like, using the Sims example, there's, like, big fundamental differences between, like, Sims 2, 3, and 4 in how the Sims behave, so...
And it's my understanding that Age of Empires is similar to that in a way, in that the way they realize the real-time strategy elements are not 100% the same from game to game, and so that's part of why they appeal to different players, as well as, of course, like, 2 being the classic, I think. And so it's it's going to be hard to get people to give up that classic game, for instance. But it's just interesting. I was like, man, that's like, for a series that was like not dead, but like sort of pushed to the side for like a decade. It's fascinating to then think about it being like, well, now they're juggling like 3 different communities at once. And potentially another one when the Age of Mythology one comes out, and like even a change to it when these ones that are out on Steam or on Xbox. It's like, man, being a game studio or game publisher seems hard.
I mean, I imagine if you're Microsoft right now, you're wanting to, be grabbing any existing communities that you maybe have been neglecting for a while.
So should I talk about well, maybe these games are bad and we shouldn't make these games side
sure.
of this? Here I am with the is Age of Empires problematic corner here. So the piece of this that I think pushes this conversation a little more to the forefront. Of course games can be about doing bad things, you kill people in every single video game, right? Not in We Are OFK. I don't think. I didn't play it, but I don't know if there's murder. There could be murder. But Age of Empires, they've done a lot of talking throughout the series' history of even though it's not necessarily super historically accurate in the game itself, right? It's not 100% not historically accurate, and more importantly, it's a game that's going to inspire you to want to go read Greek mythology or learn about trebuchets in the Middle Ages or, etc., etc.
Sure.
And it's a game that, plenty of, I think, dumb or savvy parents bought thinking well, at least it'll be sort of educational for my kid who won't get off the computer.
Yeah.
But of course the problem with that is this is a game that is truly explicitly 100% about colonialism and, empire and resource, stripping the land for resources. And that's bad. Right? That's even if it inspires a love of history in you, it's worth sort of interrogating if a love of history that's based on this view of history that's about this colonial taking over land and stripping it for everything it has to enrich yourself. Perspective on history is a great foundation to be building on. And of course that's making this overly deep, but it was interesting to me to think about.
Well, I mean, I do think sometimes civilization's like that too, right?
I think there's to a slightly lesser degree, but yes.
And there's a ton of board games, thinking about Settlers of Catan, which is classic board game that's just about going onto an uninhabited land and claiming it for yourself. And while I think that, there's themes there that are worth discussing, we also make tons of military shooters.
Right.
Which are modern stuff that we're celebrating, which generally feels more of a that sort of stuff has always felt more of an issue to me than playing around with history, I guess.
I think that's fair, and I think that's right overall. I just hadn't thought about this at all before. Partially, I think, because my major experience with this game is through Age of Mythology, where it feels a little bit more removed from, obviously my Hydras. I'm not learning too much about colonialism from my Hydras. I mean, maybe I am.
I mean, you are going and conquering other places in that game, aren't you?
No, you definitely are. I mean, you do the whole Fall of Troy thing, right? You
sure,
definitely do.
More than the Fall of Troy or whatever, which whatever. That's. I mean, I know it's not exactly, but that's just Greek people fighting Greek people. But you go to Egypt and the Norse lands, I guess.
Yeah.
And conquer around there too.
You do. I guess I just mean I'm not exactly sure what the Age of Empires campaigns feel like. At least in Age of Mythology, it's you are conquering, right? But it's not framed as now Atlantis owns Greece and owns Egypt and owns.
Yeah, you do kind of just go there and leave, which is its own problem.
Look, I'm not saying it's better. I'm just saying it's a little bit easier to maintain that cognitive dissonance when it's not literal real history.
Yeah.
It's also if you want to really dig into it, it's the progression of from hoplite to phalanx to Roman centurion that they have as your units get better. that probably has its own problems with thinking about like the flow of technology necessarily being like more and more sophisticated over time as people are conquered. But I also want to talk about, because I found this really interesting, and I would never have thought of this, but this blog that I read that was like, these are not empires. Which, up front, the person who wrote it was like, I'm a fan of the series, I'm going to buy Age of Empires 4 when it comes out, right? Like, I just think this is interesting, right? But the idea of like an empire not necessarily being what you see in these games, or just necessarily being like, it's Rome and it's an empire, but it's more about, it's like a state where the people at the center, or like the dominant, usually like ethnic group or whatever, are like stripping resources from the periphery to like enrich themselves, generally at the expense of, or through the enslavement of, a different set of people who are at the edges of the empire. And so, of course, like, that is not what you do in Age of Empires.
Yes, thankfully, I don't really think there's a slavery system in these games.
Look, they did mention it. Something else I read was like, man, the villagers sure are pretty happy and content to just, like, farm for you forever for nothing.
I saw something that, like, sort of offhandedly mentioned, like, oh yeah, there's plantations in Age of Empires 3. Don't think about it. Don't think... You don't, it's not like you like put slaves on them, but it's like, well, that's kind of fraught if you think about it a little bit.
But it was interesting to me, like, even beyond the like, well, of course a game that's like a real-time strategy game can't be like as complicated as an empire, right? And like the reason that this, even more so than a game like Civilization, which this like blog went to note is like, it's not really a great representation of empire either, but at least does more to like pretend to you that like there are empire-y things going on behind the scenes, like a little bit. But it's because these games, and this is sometimes a critique of these games from certain players, like they're very like conquest focused, very, very military focused. And there's not really another way to play them particularly effectively than to be very military focused.
Yeah.
But in that military focus, like if you were an actual empire, what you would be doing is like, look, a lot of people would die. Like, let's not pretend a lot of people wouldn't die. But it's much more focused on like capturing cities.
Yeah.
Right? And like taking over the means of production there, and like subjugating the people there. Whereas in this game, it's like, well, you can sort of have your priest wololo at dudes and have them come to your side, but like that doesn't really work on a large scale, and instead you're just like annihilating everything. And that's just like not how an empire works. And if it is how an empire works, he's like, that's how, like, maybe like if you're going to talk about like Nazi Germany, that's how they work. That's not exactly like an empire that is, not that any empires are well regarded from certain like historical theologian circles and beyond that, but it's like if you are just like a very like raise everything to the ground empire, it's not very effective, and you're not really well regarded.
Sure.
So it was just interesting to me. It was like I would never have like even thought about these not even literally being empires, and like that doesn't matter. Like it's just the title of the game. But I thought it was an interesting read. Well,
the last thing I wanted to say is that it's Age of Empires. The original is a true talk this game, because it was sort of marketed or pitched as Civilization meets Warcraft. So
an early example. A much earlier example than our typical True Talk This games.
Yeah.
I feel like We Are OFK, to transition here, feels like a game that we would make up and be like, nah, like, this is too... like, this wouldn't work.
I don't know what it would be a mashup of.
It would be Guitar Hero and or Sayonara Wild Hearts, something like that, and, like, any visual novel.
I guess so. I mean,
I don't know.
That feels like a weak... It feels like a weak thing. That's just like, okay, yeah, music, a visual novel.
But, like, that's what we would have said. We'd have been like,
yeah, and that, like, I don't know why that wouldn't have worked. It's just, there's tons of visual novels.
You're right.
You can find a visual novel about anything.
it could be, like, again, this wouldn't be what we made, but I saw at least one review of this game that was like, have you ever been playing Persona 5 and wished, like, the fighting stuff wasn't there and you were just, like, vibing?
Did a review say that?
Yes!
Why?
I don't know, and I don't remember what review it was, so I can't call it out.
That's so funny. I hope every review they write is like, were you playing Persona 5? And this and this and this and this. Okay, I played the first 3 episodes of this, and I would say it does not bear very much similarity with Persona 5. At all.
But there's text messages and friends.
I would play a Persona that's about a band. I'll say that, but no.
File that one away for a future mashup.
There's not, I would not call it very Persona 5-y.
Well, it's not set in Shibuya, so...
It's not. It's set in LA, right? Isn't LA the Shibuya of California?
No. No. What? No. Don't even get me started on my, like, I think LA is bad. LA is a bad city. I think you either love LA or you hate LA, and it comes down to, like, are you a car person or do you like to walk? And I like to walk. And
I assume it would also depend. LA is a very large city, so...
Okay, I mean, yes, of course.
Similarly to any other city, where you live in the area probably also impacts whether you like it or not.
That is very true. Anyway, to speak about the game and not just my ingrained distaste for Los Angeles. I'm just kidding. Los Angeles, like, it's fine. I had a good time. I got COVID there, I think, so maybe that's why. But, like,
yeah,
I feel angry about it.
That's valid.
Yeah. Fortunately made it home before I knew it, so haha, that's good. Didn't have to spend more time driving around there. Anyway, we are OFK, which is the game that we're talking about, not Madelyn gripes about her experience in LA, which was fine, which was totally fine.
That's very we are OFK-ian, though.
That's true. They probably would be like, why is there so much traffic? Ha ha ha, ho ho ho. And then I'd text, like, traffic, LOL, and everybody would like it in the chat.
Yeah.
So We Are OFK, like, doesn't even have a Wikipedia page, which
no, it doesn't.
was, like, shocking to me.
I think sometimes this happens with newer games. Like, just there's not a Wikipedia yet. But
I often expect it for games, and it's like usually they're there. And I was like, wow, this game really is really new and pretty indie. But it's from, LA-based developer, Team OFK. And, like, is it a game? I mean, it is, but it's a lot of other things, too.
Yeah.
So We Are OFK is a band... Is the way that we say this word biopic, like, is that how it's... I always... In my head, that is always how I've pronounced it in my head.
Biopic?
But I think that biopic is what people actually say. Even though I think biopic is cooler.
I don't know. I don't know what the actual pronunciation is.
It's a band story about a band.
Yep.
That was released in 5 episodic animated episodes about a bunch of friends trying to make music out in LA in the, like, difficult scene there.
Yes.
And so it's like, man, remember when we talked about episodic games on a podcast and we were like, I think that this is the way that you should do it. Like, you should release it like a TV show week to week. Here's a game-ish thing. Maybe more of a TV show than a game in many meaningful ways, but still a game that did that.
It's an interactive experience.
Calling anything an interactive experience, I think, is wussing out. Take a stand. Take a stand on what it is.
It's a game.
It's a game. And so We Are OFK, steps into the storied tradition of the Monkees and Gorillas, and, like, more recently and perhaps
the
more
Monkees?
The Monkees. Right? The Monkees are a fake band. I mean, they're also a real band, but they're a fake band.
Okay. Yeah, but they're, like, real people.
Yes, they are human. The monkeys are human beings, but that was the
Yes.
1960s, so I don't know what we expected. But Gorillaz, which is a virtual band, and then of course like, you know, Hatsune Miku and KDA, perhaps like more relevantly and recently, steps into those kind of like shoes. However, unlike, you know, Miku and KDA, it's instead a story about like a new band struggling, not a story about a band that is megastars already.
Yeah, so I read a lot of stuff with Teddy Deef, who's like the head honcho behind this project. He previously worked on Hyper Light Drifter, which is a much gamier game, which is interesting. But it does. They've made this with the intention of creating a digital band. So like the main project of We Are OFK is the band itself. But rather than like trying to make something that's more like reaching for really high success, like something like even like something like the Gorillaz, it's more like they're trying to make like an indie band, like an indie fictional band, which is interesting.
It is. It's like a weird thing to strive for, right?
Yeah. Because it feels like they want it to be more sort of interactive than like other bands. Like the characters feel sort of closer to you.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than really abstracted away from you the way a lot of other fictional bands are. And also just I assume like the means, their means of it, you know.
Right.
It's an interesting prospect, and I'm really curious to see how they'll develop it, because like the very idea of like having a functioning like virtual band seems like it already costs like a lot of money and time. Like he talks a little bit about like, well, maybe we can get down to the point where they can do like concerts, right, on stage, but like that takes a lot of like projection technology that is not cheap or easy to use. So I'm really curious to see how that'll swing out.
No, it's definitely an interesting tension between like we're modeling this indie band experience and we eventually want this to happen in like locations where that kind of projection can happen.
Yeah.
They did, you know, perform at the 2020 Game Awards.
Yes.
Which, not to be like the pandemic was beneficial for anyone, but like a great break for We Are OFK to be a digital band at the 2020 Game Awards when they didn't have to stand up against any live bands. I don't watch the 2020 Game Awards, but I assume.
I don't remember. I remember their performance. I don't remember if there were live bands at that one.
But it's also like I do wonder like how genuine the like desire to create an indie band is, and how much more of it is just out of the like I don't know when KDA started, and obviously there's plenty of thoughts out there about KDA and the parasocial relationships that they build with these like fictional characters and their like personas and traumas, etc. But certainly the idea of these, like, it makes a lot more sense in the like TikTok influencer era than in peak like Instagram influencer era, if that makes sense. Like, it makes more sense for the characters in this band to be relatable because we like our celebrities relatable these days.
Yeah. I don't remember which member it was, but KDA got a lot of attention like last year, 2 years ago, who knows. But there was one member that was like posting in character and social media about like, oh man, like she's so sad, and she like is feeling all of this like insecurity and stuff, and like going through hard times. And there's a lot of talk about like the ethics of that, I guess.
Yeah.
Like that they're like sort of farming like likes and support from people because they feel bad that this fictional K-pop fictional lady is sad.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. OFK doesn't really, like, they have their one social media account that tweets in character. I think it's Itsuki who runs it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still, like, promotional stuff. It's not like, oh man, I'm so down in the dumps, fans.
Yeah.
Please help me. Or anything like that. So.
Well, it's especially weird because it's like, and I couldn't quite track this in the articles exactly, so you tell me if this makes more sense to you, but it's like some of the dev team like exists in the world of the game as well.
Yeah, so the game, right? They talk about this game being made. It's like a project that they're working on with the game development team.
Because
to tell about their origins.
Several of the characters in the game are game developers.
Yes.
Several of the characters in the band in the game are game developers.
Yes-ish.
They work for a game development studio.
Well, Luca works for the game development studio and then is fired or let go in the first episode. And Itsuki works there, but as marketing person.
Got it.
And the other two members of the band, one of them is in the music industry, and one of them does, like, DJing and visual effects.
Okay, well, you're further ahead, and you have more knowledge of the story than I do, so I defer to you.
And they're working on, like, some sort of, like, live service game there.
Got
it. Some sort of competitive game. So it's not, like, the game company, Team OFK, they work there.
Right. No, I knew that, yes.
Yeah.
But that's what makes it super, I feel like that makes it even, like, harder to track. It's like these people exist in the world of the game, but also some of them play characters, and it's like, this is confusing.
I guess a little bit. It's not that confusing.
Sorry, I don't mean it's that confusing. I just mean in terms of, like, building the, like, Twitter presence parasocial relationship. It's like, you added an extra layer of complexity to it.
I think that's
social media presence.
That's sort of like the inherent tension of a virtual band, though.
Yeah.
That's in anything. That's
true. Anyway, we should, like talk about the game a little bit, and not just the, like, experiment of this. In We Are OFK, it's these 4 people coming together to form this band, some of whom, like, from various backgrounds, living in LA, all super gay, as the game describes it, all very stylish, and everything very, like, colorful and pastel, and lovely to look at, according to all of the reviews. That pretty much gets called out in all of the reviews. But if you're here looking for a lot of gameplay, you are in the wrong place.
Yeah, so you get to pick choices for each of the characters, like dialogue options. Both in scenes, and sometimes they'll have texts that they're texting back and forth, where you'll pick responses to that. Mostly just coloring it, not, like, affecting the plot of the game. Although it works, at the end of episode 3, there's, like, a text message chain so you're texting someone who's sitting next to you having an argument while you're watching one of your other friends' performances at a concert that's really important to her. And it was very emotionally taxing for me.
Oh no.
It was like, oh god, I can't. You're, like, picking the text messages and options and all of them are bad, and you're like, oh no. It was very good. I liked it a lot. So there's that. And then also each episode comes with one song that's from, like, their debut EP, I guess, where there's, like, interactive elements in those songs. So you sort of get to, like, play along to, like, color the music video, like, sort of make, like, move the camera, move the character. There might be some, like, pick things up, or jump over this or whatever. But it's mostly to make, like, a music video experience, rather than having, like, things you can fail like you would in a rhythm game.
So even though this game, I mean, especially because the color palette of it, I think, is in the same world, you might think, if you enjoyed Sayonara Wild Hearts, that, like, this is a game to pick up. That's not
you
to say
might still like it.
Sorry, you let me finish. You might still like it. I think that the style of music is not so different.
Yeah, the sort of vibes are kind of similar too, in a weird way.
Yeah. But it is a very, like, if Sayonara Wild Hearts is, like, 95% gameplay, a little bit of story theme sprinkled in there, this is, like, I don't know, it's hard to even call this, like, 95% story, 5% gameplay, because even some of that gameplay is not. Like, you don't have to engage with the music videos if you don't want to, is my understanding.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we talk about Telltale games and don't, like...
That's true.
Say, like, this doesn't have any gameplay. I don't think it's too much different from that.
But I think, like, even than a Telltale game, it's, like, a little bit, it's lighter. Like, how much involvement you have. That's all. Which is why it's so interesting to be, like, to think about, like, okay, like, especially as Netflix moves into more of these, like, I don't know, they're pushing their, like, trivia show at me really hard right now, for instance. As Netflix moves into more of these, like, lightly interactive to moderately interactive experiences, it will be interesting. I just said interactive experiences, so...
You've done it to yourself.
I say it because I haven't played the trivia game. I haven't really done any of those Netflix things, so I can't make a good judgment on what they are because I haven't done it. But as Netflix encroaches more into games, even beyond, like, the games that they, like, have that are, like, truly definitely games, right? Yeah. It'll be interesting to be like, where's the line? Yeah. Especially for something like this that is released episodically, like a TV show, like, it invites even more of that kind of boundary blurring.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely meant to be, like, a crossing, I think. I mean, the purpose of this is to launch a band, and they have talked about being a bit inspired by, like, sitcoms, and trying to sort of get that sort of vibe in the scenes. And so, and it's also got, you know, interactive bits to it. It wants you to interact with it.
Well, let me ask you, as someone who's played, you know, 60% of the game, why do you think they made it a game?
I don't know. Maybe an effort for it to be a little bit more personal.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of like their mission statement for this band as a whole. Maybe just that's their experience, right? In some ways, like, even though, like, it's a lot of, you know, techie people or game developers working on this, there's still that sort of shared aspect of struggling to make something meaningful in LA.
Yeah.
So maybe just as a way to imbue their own experience into it more, like making it more personal to themselves. And also the way the music videos are done is fun. So
cool. I was just wondering, because I was like, this feels like, I mean, obviously this started development before this, but in the, like, post-Arcane era, the post-Edge Runners era, like, video game animated television is certainly having a moment right now.
Sure. They would have, to be a real animated series, though, like, they would have had to put a ton more resources into that. Like, it looks nice, but it's not, if you just put this as an animated show, like, put it next to Arcane, you'd be like, well...
Sorry, I mean, obviously it's not going to be next to Arcane. Like, that's not what I was thinking.
It looks like game animation, you know?
Right. Yeah, that's fair.
Like, they have an actual animated intro, like an opening at the start of each episode. But, you know, I think they're 3D models, even then the backgrounds are, like, backgrounds are 2D and hand-painted, but I believe the characters themselves are 3D models that they put into the scene.
Well, finally, it's interesting to think about the biopics. Like, can you think of a single other game biopic?
Age of Empires.
Age of Empires, you're right! You're right! Oh, it's biopics week here on Talk This.
I mean, not like I wouldn't say like a modern one. What was it? Radiohead released a game album like last year. That's not a biopic, but reminded me of that.
It's just interesting, right? Biopics are so prestige-y in like, or like biographies are so prestige-y in like every other medium.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying this is a biopic of fictional people.
Well, that's the exception that proves the rule, right?
Yeah.
It was just interesting to me. I hadn't really thought about, like, you know, sometimes like, we talk about, like, oh, like, horror. Like, you know, we talked about horror on the podcast, whenever that was. And it was like, oh, like, there are certain horror stories we tell in games, and there are, like, a bunch of other horror stories that we just, like, don't. And so it was interesting to me to be like, oh, man, like, here's another genre that I hadn't ever thought of at all as not being represented in games. And, like, here it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I get it. You don't want to let people, you know, it's dangerous when you let people impersonate, like, historical or living figures or organizations or groups and just kind of do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And games are ripe for that. I guess there are some Jesus games.
Probably, yeah. There's definitely some Bible games.
But I would like to see an Abraham Lincoln game. You know what? I'm coming up with the mashup as we speak here, aren't I? So I should go to that.
Yeah.
So one option for this is definitely like some kind of this is gonna be like FIFA Music Edition. So it's like I'm just creating career mode for Guitar Hero, but it'll be like really based on someone's life, I think. Maybe there is a little bit of that in Guitar Hero, actually. I feel like there is a little bit of, like, here are these famous guitarists and, like, a little bit about their life story.
Yeah.
But you can't make them do anything other than be bad at guitar, really. So, not too much danger to your image. But I feel like it would have to be, like, a story of, like, you're a band or no, I don't want it to be a band.
The story of the first band in history.
Maybe. The first band in history.
Yeah. It'd be a little bit made up.
Yeah.
But
it's a game that's like just the cultural victory of civilization, basically.
Sure.
But it's real. It's a Battle of the Bands. Battle of the Bands.
Sure.
That's the title, Battle of the Bands.
Yeah.
Doing it. This is going to be a good mashup. Okay. It's like... you know, there's different maps that are like cities, and there's like different music venues, and you can kind of like, and you know, they're popular with different factions.
Yeah.
And you can kind of like take over and like I don't know exactly what the units would be, like groupies, roadies.
Groupies or fans.
Yeah, fans. But
what's the roadies? Roadies are the ones that carry your stuff. Right?
Yeah. Roadies, groupies. You can have like a social media team members. It's like it's a colonialism conquest game, but with music.
Yeah. I feel like that would make more sense if you're like a label, right?
Okay, I see that. It does make more sense if you're a label.
Because then you can have like multiple bands that are each at each performance venue, I guess. They just never stop playing. They just live there.
Yes. I feel like this could be good. Age of Tunes.
No, I think there's something to like having like a music themed RTS. There's Brutal Legend had like RTS segments, right? But this would be a little bit different from that.
Yeah. A little more strategic than that, maybe.
Yeah.
But you could also go the other way. You could also go the other way and make a biopic game about Hammurabi or I don't know.
Yeah, I wanna like a, you know, sort of dramatic sitcom type take on Hammurabi's code. That's what I've always wanted.
Imagine the text messages about an eye, like coming up with an eye for an eye. Carving it into tablets.
Yeah.
Delivering that to each other. No. You'd have to come up with a good, like, what's a good, like, historical group? You know?
I don't know. I have to do some research.
I'm trying to think. I mean, probably, like, we probably want to stay away from, like, Greece and Rome, because there's just so much of that.
Sure.
Out there already. Like, we could definitely do, like, a Julius Caesar or Augustus Caesar type biopic, but that just feels like Haven't we been there, done that with Julius Caesar at this point?
That would include some murder, which again we cannot confirm or deny whether we are OFK as murder. There's still 2 more episodes to play. It could happen.
Okay, let me think. Good buddies throughout history. I mean, you could steal that the APUS assignment from us, and it could be like the the Andrew Jackson Christmas party assignment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that from APUS?
What was it again?
It was like you were having a dinner party, and it
oh
was like
yeah,
all these people from like that sort of era of history, and you had to make sure you didn't sit anyone near each other that like
would kill each other.
Kill each other. But like, I don't really want a game about Andrew Jackson, so
no.
So maybe not that. There have to have been some good like Chinese dynasty buddies at some point,
Probably,
like,
yeah.
something like that, or like a Mansa Musa game.
People are really into to what is it? 3 Kingdoms, 12 Kingdoms?
What?
What era are the Warriors games set in? Lu Bu.
The Warriors games? You're
Lu
losing
Bu.
me. What?
Lu Bu.
Lu Bu? What are you
What is it?
saying?
The 3 Kingdoms. 3 Kingdoms.
Oh, the Romance of the 3 Kingdoms.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you said 3 Kingdoms, and I was like, 3 houses?
People
Crusader
really like
Kings?
the 3 Kingdoms era. They had, buddies.
That's true. We could also do, like the Romance of the 3 Kingdoms is probably a good take on that, except that, like, Romance of the 3 Kingdoms has told that story, like, 20 times.
Yeah.
So, I think I in good conscience can't do that, because people will be, like, comparing it. There's gotta be something. I'll keep thinking while I'm doing the outro here. Listeners, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
It's okay that you were late because you're Madelyn and you're used to
I was just thinking, I think I thought of 3 Kingdoms because there was a anime that aired earlier this year where Kong Ming from that era is reincarnated into modern Shibuya and then helps a singer take over the music scene.
So you're telling me somebody already made our game as an anime? Shoot. Listeners, if you could think of some historical buddies that you'd like to have a light gameplay biopic about, maybe with some real-time strategy elements. I don't know, we could throw some battles in there for the Age of Empires fans. But have you played any of the Age of Empires games? Do you think 2 is the best? Are you Age of Mythology stans like us? Have you played We Are OFK? Are you big into their music? It was a little bit polarizing reviews. So, like, did you enjoy it? Was it not for you? Do you wish that you were a pastel-colored, like, queer person in LA, vibing with your music friends, struggling against an industry that isn't always welcoming to you?
Do you wish that?
Do you wish that? If that's you, or if you have something else to say about this week's episode, you should hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and yes, still Twitter, at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, where Emma's about to pull our next selections, and read the blog, featuring long-running series Click with Boyfriend and Split Screen. I didn't do Halloween games, or games for falling leaves or whatever, or Veterans Day games, but maybe I'll do turkey games. You never know. Next year, 2023 is going to be the year that I do stupid seasonal blogs on the Talk This blog, so bookmark it now. But most importantly, if you enjoy the show, you should subscribe so you never miss an episode on Sundays at noon. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, really anywhere that you can find podcasts, you can find Talk This. Next week, it's our 6-week recap. Will I finish Judgment in time? Will I go back to The Last of Us? Will I play any of the many games that I've started for the podcast and that, God willing, I will finish by the end of the year, so at the end of the year podcast, Emma isn't like, let me talk about the 40 games I've played. And
I've not played 40 games.
Finished 2.5.
We
we'll
finished
see.
more than that.
But in 2 weeks, for a special... That Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend doesn't have any names. It's not Black Friday. It's not Cyber Monday. It's just...
Sunday.
Soupy Sunday, where you feel kind of soupy from all the gravy you've eaten or whatever.
Yeah.
Emma, what are we talking about?
On our old game, we're talking about Live Alive.
Oh boy.
I have a bunch in here that are like, this could be the old game or the new game.
Seriously.
And our new game is going to be the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe.
All right. So look forward to that. Look forward to me calling it Live Alive stubbornly the entire episode.
As the Nintendo Direct guy said, live.
Who can trust the Nintendo Direct man?
I trust the Nintendo Direct man with my life.
I trust the men who are speak on Nintendo Directs. I'm not sure.
Not the Indie World presenters, the main Nintendo Direct guy.
Okay. Anyway, look forward to that, listeners, on Soupy Sunday. As I've now decided to call it. So listeners, that's it for the show. I still don't have any better historical besties. So that would be the title of the game, Age of Historical Besties.
Yeah.
But thanks for listening. Emma, do you have a good sign-off?
This week, I hope that your priests are woolululuing.
Wolala.